So, welcome everybody to a session that is going to talk all about AI and science. Welcome also to our online audience. We have more people signed up to watch this online than any of the other breakouts, so congratulations to you on pulling in the crowds. And I think we've landed on a topic that, as we heard in some of the earlier sessions today, is very much at the heart of these discussions about competitiveness, about prioritization, and difficult choices to be made in Europe in terms of where public R&I funding is going to go in the years to come into critical technology domains in areas where Europe has existing strengths and the possibility of medium to long-term global leadership. So, I think we all know the background, right? I mean, we heard some of it in the opening plenary, the drumbeat around Europe's relative lack of competitiveness in AI vis-a-vis the US and China is something that just gets parroted, I would suggest, but perhaps without deeper reflections about what assets Europe does have, which could be usefully deployed to establish fields of innovation and leadership that we haven't necessarily thought about, or at least given a lot of political attention and money so far. So before I introduce the panel, just a couple of reflections. We have this drumbeat around the scale of investment. Right? In the budget session, Daniel Gross was talking about this 10-to-1 ratio, US to Europe in terms of corporate R&D investment. And I saw in the New York Times today that OpenAI is now in discussion for a 40 billion funding round. Yet they're still losing money. Right? They're scheduled to lose 5 billion this year. And I think the second part to this is the emergence of DeepSeek and at least the perception that you could do this much cheaper. Right? It doesn't need the hyperscale investments. It doesn't need the concentration of the technology development and the resources and the data in the hands of the few, could potentially be in the hands of many, is actually something that could be an opportunity for Europe. But then how to exploit it? Well, the argument, or one argument, is that science offers one of the biggest assets that we have. And the last sort of comment from my side before we get going with the panel discussion is that I was at an event in December and learned that actually AlphaFold, the Nobel Prize winning thing coming out of DeepMind and Google, got 25% of its data from the European Molecular Biology Laboratory. And around those conversations came the realization that Europe, not least through its world-leading research infrastructures, sits on vast piles of high-quality, curated data. So in the policy context, we have the green shoots of realization, I think, that we're moving now towards, using what we have in terms of our scientific excellence and our data assets and our infrastructures to link that in with innovation, entrepreneurship, and competitiveness. The AI Factories initiative from the Commission is perhaps a first notable step in this direction. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. Is the scientific asset base in Europe the best place for Europe to prioritize if it really wants to be competitive in the global AI race? So in a moment, I'm going to introduce the panel, but first I'm going to ask you for a show of hands. How many of you agree with that thesis? That if Europe wants to be globally competitive in AI, it should prioritize AI development and use in science. Okay, not bad, 75%. Very good, so that is what is going to be at the heart of our discussions. Now, obviously with these high chairs, I have to juggle my papers a little bit. But we have an eminent panel who are going to be talking through some of the dimensions of this question with us. And with that, I'd like to invite or introduce from my right, so Xavier Bayard, who's the Director for Innovation to Market at EIT Manufacturing. Next to him, Andrew Ginger, who's the Vice Provost for International Engagement at Northeastern University in Boston. Next to him, we have Fatma Deniz, who's the Vice President for Digitalization and Sustainability at TU Berlin. Ensuite, Fabrizio Gagliardi, who is Senior Strategy Advisor at Barcelona Supercomputing Center. And last but by no means least, Filip Piatkiewicz, who's the Secretary General for the AI Data and Robotics Association. one of the partnerships under Horizon Europe with AI very much at its heart. So welcome to you all. Thank you for joining us. Let's start with your first takes on this question, whether you think science offers the only realistic avenue for Europe to be a global leader in AI. And let's move down the panel from right to left as you guys are looking at it. Xavier, you first. Actually, if you take the microphone there.
Thank you. First, thank you for having me, and very nice to be here with the whole panel. First reflection. Well, I want to say that research in AI in Europe is well recognized, and that's quite of an asset that we have. And if we're looking at who is leading AI research in those very large high-tech US corporations like Meta or Google, you'll see that they are products of European research. So definitely we are strong there, and we need to stay strong there. And I think we have also to explore this avenue that you're mentioning on exploiting more the capabilities of Europe around research. That being said, there are other opportunities also to make business out of AI, fortunately, and I'll be speaking about it a bit more in the case of manufacturing, but of course there are lots of applications that we can think about that leverage AI and that can bring value to Europe. And I'm thinking also, I heard in the last panel that the battle was kind of lost, on some of the AI models compared to US and China, and you just mentioned DeepSeek, but I would like to remind that we have, in Gen AI, we have a European champion called Mistral AI. They've raised a few hundreds of millions of euros, which at the European scale is pretty nice, but then you mentioned 40 billion for OpenAI, and of course we're very, very far from that. But there are opportunities, and I think, of course, we need to put the right resources to support the champions, the European champions. But with a little push and the right ecosystem and the right funding opportunities, there are still opportunities for us to be in competing with the world leaders.
Okay, thank you. Now, Andrew.
Thanks.
You are British.
I am
and
British,
yet
yes.
you wear an American hat in many ways in this panel. So what's your take on this, taking the transatlantic view?
Yeah, I wear multiple hats. So because we have a UK university as well as several American campuses and Canadian campuses. So I look at it from a transatlantic perspective, I guess. And as you say, yeah, as the accent gives away, definitely British. So I think my feeling is, clearly, Europe has huge assets. In terms of its fundamental research, it's very strong, as everyone has been saying today. Its ability to generate startups, actually statistically very good. And as you said, lots of curated data, electronic health systems, and so forth, all of which gives it huge numbers of assets. And I think the question for me is it all on science to make this work, and what kind of science? I suppose would be two questions that come to my mind. So in relation to the first, I mean, to state the obvious, I'm afraid, but the obvious perhaps bears staring at, it's the scale-up problem, isn't it? Where is the capital? Amongst other things, whereas, as people from Microsoft this morning were saying, do we have the people in the enterprises who know actually what to do with this stuff, which looks very nice, but how does it help me? What are the interventions that are made there? So there's a kind of, as it were, blurred space between science, as it were, proper, and the larger landscape, where I think it's clear that there has been a difference with, say, US-China. The other side of it, I think, I suppose, is what is science in this respect. So it is fundamental research, but it's also thinking about technology as science, practical solutions as science. How do we resolve the real-world usage of this stuff? And perhaps we'll come back to this later. And what does it mean to nurture creativity in that space amongst scientists to come to lateral solutions? So we don't really know what happened with DeepSeek, but let's take it as an example of lateral thinking, of a new approach. How do you actually stimulate that and make people think in those terms?
Okay, great. Thank you. Fatma.
Cool. Thanks for the invitation. Thanks for being here in the panel. This is great. So I come from the scientific perspective, obviously, here, so I do think one of the major parts, assets that we have in Europe is the basic science, the fundamental science that we have. It was already mentioned, maybe the lack to the technology transfer is something that we can probably discuss here in the round as well. But I also see different opportunities here. We have definitely science, and the emphasis that we have put in Europe to open science is extremely important. And here comes the things that you already mentioned in terms of like creation of the data, accessibility of data, and how important it has been over the several years. Then the second point I would like to make is probably around infrastructures, and this will probably take on Fabrizio as well, in terms of like sustainable green technologies for high performance computing infrastructures, but also data infrastructures, and how we can in fact, let's say, marry these two in terms of thinking about the data life cycle in one ecosystem. The third point is, I think, talent and education, and I will go into that a little bit maybe later, or we can discuss this a little bit later, how we can keep talent. We do have a lot of talent within Europe, AI and engineers, but we also have the brain drain. So how can we basically make sure with incentives, but also with funding possibilities to keep our talents here, to keep our startups here, that are starting here, in fact, but then essentially moving. And I think another part where we are already a leader, and we have to think about deeply how we can pursue this endeavor, is ethical leadership, right? And in general, leadership in AI and safety. But if I can come back to the first two, like data and infrastructures, I think you already mentioned some examples. We have, well, first of all, we know we need highly curated, and also highly standardized data sets in order to create better AI systems. And you mentioned the molecular biology department from the Bioinformatics Institute, basically, but also in medicine we have, right, the European data health space, right?
On its way.
Sorry,
On its way, along with many others.
But we are. I think we are getting there. The finance data space is another example that we are putting the emphasis into the data part, and I think that is an asset that we have that we can use. And not only in science, in fact, but also in small, medium-sized enterprises. Manufacturing is a good example, I think, right? There is like this product passport for packaging, for example. Things like that is, I think, one good example for the data. So I think we have these four big assets, basically, within Europe where we can put our emphasis on.
Okay, super. We are indeed coming back to some of these in due course. Fabrizio, you next. Let's hear the Barcelona supercomputing perspective.
Well, I don't know if it's the Barcelona supercomputing. I'm here representing myself, and so whatever I say doesn't really commit to the Barcelona Supercomputer Center, so I can say what I really think. So first of all, maybe to dismiss some myth. So DeepSeek is not cheap. Just happened. I did it on purpose. On Monday, I was having lunch with some Chinese colleagues who are not part of the DeepSeek, but they are part of the infrastructure who support the DeepSeek. And that is not cheap. There is a huge infrastructure behind, but it's not, well, if you like, they could not use the US infrastructure, although they could indeed play a little bit with what is available or open. But so DeepSeek is cheaper than, let's say, what we've seen so far coming from US, this kind of brute force approach, which in US is understandable. You buy, well, Trump together with his friend Musk said, 100 billions now, 400 billions to come, 500 billion. Well, if you do that, 100% will go to American industry. So for them it's easy. So if we just copy the US approach, we'll be basically continue to give, like we do in high-performance computing, money to US. I mean, all those European high-performance computing center, at least at the component level, they're 100% Americans. And in many cases also, the integrator are Americans. Well, there is evidence, somehow providing computing facilities, but is using Intel, NVIDIA, AMD, components, okay? So the brute force approach can be afforded by the States is definitely not the way for Europe to go. So we need to be smarter. So the big merit of DeepSeek is to demonstrate that even if you don't have a complete ownership, mastership of the technology like the only Americans have, you can still do a good job. I mean, I've been playing with DeepSeek and ChatGPT for the last 2 weeks, or a little bit less. Yeah, pretty comparable in performance. Not yet, I think, at the level of ChatGPT if you want to use it as a kind of a co-pilot. But if you give, say, even relatively complex scientific problems to both, the performance are also quite reasonable. The censorship, you say, oh yeah, but DeepSeek is censored. Well, I ask both ChatGPT and DeepSeek, actually in the presence of my Chinese colleague, the question, what are the chances for mainland China to take over Taiwan in a relatively short time? DeepSeek gave an answer much more, I would say, complete, and even, taking some political risk than ChatGPT. He was saying, well, yes, it could happen, but if it happens, Taiwan will retaliate, and then US, and then so also the censorship is not very deep. So I think DeepSeek is probably the best good invention nowadays after New York invented the Italian pizza. But, I think it's important. Now, maybe more close to the question, if science the best medium to harness the full potential AI? Well, at least in Europe, definitely it is. If nothing else, in science, we can maybe be a little bit less dependent on the typical European regulate too much too soon. In science, we have this kind, because we are not really doing business, we are a little bit detached by, too many, we are not in the defense business, we are, at least not for now, we might become, but, so there is a freedom that can help us to do things in AI faster than, let's say, a company subject to all the regulation certification that the European Union certainly want to do, for good reason. But we are again in a situation where US does not really regulate, it let the company do whatever they like, and especially with the new administration, and Musk taking the decision, you can imagine which direction they're going. China, they regulate, but regulate in their own way. And Europe is, what it was, I think it was the lady from Microsoft that said in Europe, well, in the States they hire engineers, in Europe we hire lawyers. I mean, there is some truth, of course, it was a joke, but there is quite some truth. So definitely I say yes, science is the best vehicle, or let's say the best environment to develop AI and make AI successful. The importance of data, you mentioned, so I don't need to go into that. Europe has a lot of data in any scientific domain, and again, most of the data which are interesting to train large AI systems come from science. That is a reason why, for instance, these large, hyperscaler companies, they are very, very keen in acquiring scientific data. So basically, they give you, and we heard also this morning, they give you access to the infrastructure for free in exchange of your scientific data. So we better do something in Europe, because that is a major asset that we have. We curate, we spend a lot of money acquiring the data, curating the data, making the data openly available, and it would be silly that then the profit of that goes to US or China, just because they're open. So I will stop here just to let a chance to that.
Great. Okay. So, Philip, let's move on with you, and then we'll stay with you after first thoughts, because we have to then talk a little bit about the enterprise competitiveness and innovation space. But
sure.
First reaction.
So I basically want to agree with all the panelists and just focus a little bit on what Fabrizio said, because I think it's about the insight. So something like DeepSeek gives us some insights in the way that we could be doing AI, right? And it gives us some insights about the type of AI that we should be doing as well. So I think in particular, what DeepSeek proved is that all the innovation is going to happen within the model, right? So there's plenty of room still to innovate within the model, and essentially what they produced wasn't necessarily a transformer class kind of typical model, but it was a kind of evolution of that. So I think there's a lot of room to innovate as Europe there, and I think in particular completely new models that have a completely different mathematical basis. I think there's a huge opportunity to really look at what the frontier in these models holds, and I think that is an opportunity that Europe should be doubling down on. So that's the first thing. I think the second thing that we learned from this is the power of open source, right? The reason that they managed to accelerate so quickly, and if you see the evolution of these models, the reason they're evolving so quickly is because it's open source, and because the Chinese government are heavily backing open source developments, heavily. And I think that alignment between the policy and the technology developers is really, really key, and that's something we could be learning from as well. And I think also...
Sorry, Philip, just a question on that.
Yeah.
So in the context of the Agile partnership,
Yeah.
where does open source fit within your model and planning? Is it prominent at the moment, or...?
It is. I mean, so the example that I was going to give later on, you have a Euro Open LLM that launched, I think that was the name of it, that launched just a few days ago. It's backed by a number of top kind of European organizations, industry, to develop a family of open source models for Europe. So I think that there is an understanding that this stuff is important. Well, I think where I would like to see more vocalization of this coming from policymakers, though, because I think it's one of the only ways that we can catch up quickly to the rest of the world. And I think if you open source, you make a commitment to deploy open source technologies, it will create a number of they will create positive feedback loops to drive this forward. And I think also the last thing I was going to say about the developments is you still need concentrations. You still need concentrations of capital, you still need concentrations of chips, and you still need concentrations of talent, right? No matter what you do. So I think that's something that we have to be building on in Europe as well. So those are the kind of three insights that we take from that, and I think those still hold true for Europe. And then I think in terms of the AI for science agenda, I think Europe really needs a long-term vision of what we're doing AI for. And I think that's one way that we can distinguish ourselves from the rest of the world. I think there's a very, very strong purpose to do this as well. I think when I think about AI and science, I think about what is it going to produce. And for me, it's going to produce a future technology stack across software to hardware. The impact of AI is going to be felt throughout kind of material science developments and design, etc. I mean, like there are any number of different applications for this. And for me, you give it some additional purpose by saying, well, we're going to have to build this for the future of Europe, and it's going to be a 10, 15-year plan, I think. And these are some of the concepts that I think policymakers also need to get their heads around, that this is not something that's going to bring returns within a few years.
Okay. So that's kind of, actually, it spiked my gun a little bit, because I was going to do a follow-up question on competitiveness, but I think we'll sort of loop back to that a little later, because this issue about longer-term planning, right, the need for a vision, the need for a very clear rationale as AI for what, right? It's been very much framed in economic terms until now. I mean, we talk about societal transformation, everybody's using it because it's on our digital devices, etc. But if we're talking about societal impact and value creation, maybe we need to reframe, right? And it's not just in economic terms. But having said that, it matters for industry, or at least it should. So Xavier, I wanted to ask you around this. I mean, we've heard a lot about the importance of AI for productivity, right, and efficiency, and boosting industrial competitiveness, as highlighted in Draghi and Letter and beyond. So from your perspective, I mean, are we on the right path? You're representing a huge number of companies active in different manufacturing sectors. So what are you seeing in terms of its adoption, its integration? Nana Louise Linda talked about 11% of companies using AI. Are we on the right path?
Okay, thanks for the question. Not an easy answer. Just as a reminder also for everyone, today in Europe, manufacturing represents 15% of the GDP and 32 million jobs. So this is a huge sector and very necessary for European prosperity. So of course, our first goal at EIT Manufacturing is making sure that we can support to keep European manufacturing competitive and in the global world. EIT Manufacturing, we've been established 2019, and we've been starting operations in 2020, and we have numbers of programs that are supporting either startup companies or development of innovation projects with the specific goal that we are very high TRL, so very close to the commercialization. So we're really bringing those innovations to first sales and first commercialization. And over the past 5 years of activity, we've supported over 100 of those projects. We've supported several hundreds of startups, fundraising, but also in supporting commercialization. And statistically, projects and startups that are operating in the AI world was around 60%. So it's kind of a lot of things. Now, of course, we can question what are these innovations and what do they bring in terms of competitiveness. And I see several waves. So early years of EIT Manufacturing operations, most of the applications that we've supported around AI would be what I call maybe smart algorithms. So we're taking the data of a machine, or we're taking the data of several machines, and we're running optimization algorithms. So it's about predictive maintenance, it's about smart planning, it's about those kind of things. So of course that has some value, and we've increased productivity, and we've reduced the number of issues on production lines. But this is still small-scale deployments of AI. Now we're kind of in a second wave, which is basically maybe smarter systems where we are integrating more data, and it all comes back to data. What's the data available really? And with more data, we're also tackling more societal and environmental issues. I'm going to give you 2 examples. We are currently supporting a project on energy optimization. Well, we all know the problem of the high cost of energy in Europe today, and it's a huge problem for our competitiveness globally. And so there are a number of organizations that are working in kind of switching the way we're looking at energy, and and so looking at how we can optimize production based on availability of cheap energy, and cheap energy is renewables. And so we're using AI, so models of course, the whole factory and how it consumes the energy, but also looking at the those models. Weather, yes. Weather forecasts to understand, okay, when will it be sunny, or when will there be wind, and then try to automatically adapt production cycles to the availability of that energy. And this has, of course, an impact on the energy consumption, and in manufacturing, I mean, a large part of the costs are coming from the energy, especially high energy-intensive industries, but also more traditional ones. And so, yeah, we're using those models, so factory data plus weather data, to try to tackle a problem that is both competitiveness and environmental. The second example that I have is around robotics. Of course, robotization, you can understand that implementing automation in factories in the long term, it's a very good investment in terms of productivity, but it's also solving some problems of availability of workforce. And we've supported a Czech startup last year, and we're still supporting it now, that has developed a system that is teaching robots how to do paint jobs for the automotive industry, for example, by mimicking the movements of a skilled operator. And the fact is that it's not that we want to replace operators, but we don't have enough skilled operators anymore for those kind of jobs, and those kinds of jobs are really hard and movements are repeating and so on. And so by combining again, well, the factory data plus human data, basically, and tracking motion of operators, then we're able to solve several problems in one go, both availability of skill force and also some more human-centered considerations on the difficulty of the job and so on. And so, yeah, so we're in that wave now. Maybe to go to the next wave that is yet to be coming. Again, we have to think expanding the data sets. So there are a number of initiatives around the Gaia-X infrastructure that are dedicated to manufacturing problems. We have Catena-X for automotive industry, for example. We're working at the IT manufacturing on a project called Oil Pro Gigant, which is dedicated on manufacturing. And when the data along the whole supply chain is available, then it will unlock also new applications that, yeah, I think will be source of even more impactful innovation.
It was quite interesting when we had our briefing call to hear that Gaia-X was still running, to be perfectly honest, but that's a slightly controversial take from my side. Okay, so question for the panel, but maybe Fatma with a first response on this. We've heard earlier today, we've heard initial remarks and perspectives here on gaps in the chain. We see where our assets lie, we have the fundamental research, we have the institutions, we have the infrastructures, we have the data and so forth, but it's not really joined up, right? So from the policy perspective, what would you like to see from either the European Commission or national governments as very clear actions to try and make this a proper chain, to close the links and the loops? Fatma, maybe you'd like to go first.
Yes, sounds good. I think some of them I mentioned already. I have, again, several points, but I will touch upon exactly what you just said between the data and the infrastructure topic. I think marrying these, I mean, first of all, investing in them, into domain-based, domain knowledge-based data, and having the infrastructure for this, making them available, openly available. And then also creating the, in my case, because I'm also a vice president for sustainability, definitely creating sustainable infrastructures, computing infrastructures, and then marrying these two in order to have one place where we can, connected place in this case, where we can, in Europe, within Europe, access these infrastructures for data and compute easily, but also make it possible for not only scientists, but also for entrepreneurs, basically, to access them, create their models, improve their models for their domain-specific needs is going to be crucial, I think. But to roll back, what I would still, in addition, like to have from policymakers is, I mentioned the topic of talent earlier in my first 2 minutes, is basically to have an investment in AI education in general, but also in retaining talent and getting new talent into Europe and making the ecosystem available for this. We have some examples, I can give you some examples from Germany on this, where how we address this in some ways with the national AI centers. We have 6 of them, one of them in fact at the TU Berlin, AlphaFold, and there also we're already merging data and learning together very effectively, but also other things like planned in AI innovation or innovation park AI in Heilbronn in southwest of Germany, which is going to create this ecosystem of SMEs, startups, talent, data and policymakers basically into, or like public sector into one place where they can work together, which is in some ways lacking in the European context. So
it's breaking down some of the silos as well.
Yeah, in comparison to, for example, US, where of course these are very, very established already. And I think we can't go around not mentioning competitive funding schemes, right? Competitive funding schemes that allow to accelerate breakthrough. And we have these, of course, ERC models, EIC program now in terms of innovation. But we really have to focus on those, and there is already a wish for doubling the FP10, right, funding scheme in the FP10 Those are extremely important ERC models where we really have more like bottom-up, from the scientists, from the entrepreneurs, driven research possibilities and things that we actually bring from basic science and not end on the product, but bring it also into the product, right? All the cycle.
Okay, that's great. So listen, I'm going to ask you in a couple of minutes if you have any specific questions about this policy intervention pathway or any recommendations or big ideas what you think the Commission or national government should be doing to strengthen the AI innovation chain. But first, for the rest of the panel, okay, Fatma, one more thing, and then we're going to give the others a chance to give their.
One more important thing is actually, because what I would like policymakers to make is also reduce bureaucracy. And I think this holds for science, this holds for entrepreneurs. There was a Bitkom 2024 survey where entrepreneurs or tech startups were asked. There are like 70% wants this as well. So I think we really have to listen to this. We need to regulate some things, yes, ethical AI, but we also have to reduce bureaucracy around this.
Okay, so other members of the panel, who'd like to go next in terms of clear policy actions? Fabrizio.
Well, I go very much along with what Fatma just said, and also from other people. First of all, long-term is important. A good example that we're actually experiencing now at the Barcelona Supercomputer Center, we have a pretty supportive government, so at the national level, the policy for AI is pretty good. There are important funding, so we've just been able to hire 158 postdocs just to work on AI, inserting them in our already established discipline, life science, and so forth. But, 158 smart postdocs who come, and they will work with other more traditional scientists to bring AI, I think is very important. And that is, of course, behind that there is a clear policy decision. But it's for 4 years. So what happened after 4 years? So we do all that, and then the people, of course, the best would be the first to leave and go to maybe US companies. So that is very important. So that at the national level. And well, we heard about the program in Germany. I'm familiar with AI Center in Germany. So definitely there are several actions that can be taken at the national level. They're very important. But what is important is that the politicians understand the importance of sustainability. I mean, doing something because, everybody now speak about ChatGPT. Okay, let's do something for 3-4 years is not good enough. It will take years and years, for Europe, to basically assert, their leadership there. And at European level, well, you mentioned ERC. ERC is actually one of the strongest points of Europe. Nobody else around the world has a program as good and as competitive, as useful as the ERC. So that, again, is something that probably should be an entire part of ERC, branch of ERC, dedicated to fundamental research, because that's what ERC does. And then there is other things like the EIC, the European Investment Bank, that then can support the exploitation of the fundamental research that are ERC. So I think we need a bit of everything, an action at the European level, policy level, and reflected in the member state. But what is important is the long-term sustainability. Doing something big just because the Americans do it or the Chinese come out with deep sea is not going to be enough.
And in reality, it will never be as big either, right? Okay, so Philip, Andrew, Xavier.
I just wanted to riff a little bit on what Fabrizio was saying, because I think it's really key. I think the sustainable question, how we do things more frugally and a little bit, we diversify a little bit our kind of AI strategy, because, I mean, if you look at what they're doing in the US, the likes of Meta have just bought like 2 gas power plants to like power all of these initiatives. Microsoft is looking at bringing on like a nuclear power station.
Yeah, and the UK, Keir Starmer was talking about it yesterday, right? Small modular reactors to power data centers in the UK.
Exactly. So I think there needs to be a reflection here on how we do that, how we move away from kind of brute force kind of approaches, because this is the same route that we'll be following otherwise. And I think strategically that would be a massive mistake for Europe to do as well, because there's also this question of, are we a fast follower or a slow follower in what we're doing? And I think it's pretty fair to say we're probably a slow follower, in which case our path down that route is almost certainly the wrong one. But I was going to say also, I think there is something here about bottom-up approaches as well, and adopting more this kind of competitive stage gate approach to the way that we deliver the funding. I think that's important because it helps. It would help future programs function a bit better. Right now we have this problem with kind of oversubscription and everything else, and it also helps us to provide an evidence base for what we're kind of wanting to invest in, right, as well. And I think that's really, really critical. So I strongly support the kind of this idea that that kind of stage gate approach, the funding should be looked at and mainstreamed probably across where it fits across different parts of the program. I think there's a particular role for this type of funding to help kind of facilitate a little bit the interactions between public and private sector, and I think how we make that process how we make those partnerships more functional and more efficient, I think is really, really important, because I think it demonstrates a model that's different to the US and to China. It's a harder one because it's on the basis of quite often collaborating between two partners that see the world very, very differently. But I think it's one that's really critical to kind of get right. And I think just repeating what I said before, I think the open source opportunity is also one where I think we have to look at creating the right policy frameworks for. Okay, great. So Andrew and then Xavier. I mean, Andrew, what I find interesting also in terms of what Fatma and Fab and so on have said, this idea of bottom-up approach, but also this idea, ERC for AI, that's actually quite an interesting idea, I think. I wonder whether that could gain traction in policy directions, but kind of what you're doing with your impact engines in Northeastern, there's directionality, trying to work back to moving the needle, right, around the societal challenge in applied settings. But it also has that bottom-up approach of trying to put together lots of different actors. So, whether it's from the insights of supporting policy, if there is supporting policy in Massachusetts or in the US for your kind of approach, or if it's something you're just doing autonomously, what do you see as the critical support that policymakers can make for these kinds of applications of AI to fix real-world problems?
Yeah, and thanks for that. And perhaps just to explain that what an impact engine is, which is a Northeastern thing. So an impact engine essentially, as a research project, begins with either a real-world problem or opportunity. So, for example, too many cardiac patients they come out of the emergency room, and within X amount of time, they have serious problems. So how do we predict what's going to happen there? How do we prevent that? So once we've identified that opportunity or problem, then who do we actually need in the room? Rather than saying this is a philosophy problem or this is a computer science problem, you need your computer scientist, you need your medic, you need your psychologist. They need to be together. And so that is one of the key ways in which we're thinking about research. And it emerged from the institution itself in actually a planning process and reflection on our academic plan. I think what's curious, and I was thinking it's good that you asked me, because it was going around my head as colleagues here were talking both about the kinds of things that are needed, say, in manufacturing, or about the vision that might inform ERC. And two things really occur to me here. One of them is, and the question I sort of floated before, what's science? And one way to frame that, sure, is the high TRL, low TRL, fundamental versus applied. And I'm not going to deny that's helpful. Another way of framing it is, what's an interesting question that could be addressed? And among those interesting questions are, how do you speed up manufacturing processes? And that's a serious intellectual question, which requires all kinds of input from disciplines and considerable depth of thought, but that doesn't fit neatly on, say, an applied pure spectrum. The other aspect of it is creativity, isn't it? And I suppose, here I'm speaking perhaps more as a historian. When we see breakthroughs, is that because some people sat down in a committee room and said, you know what, in about 10 years' time, our country should invent ChatGPT, and we'll do that on the back of something we call social media, and we'll make Facebook. We'll have a call for that. Or is it something more nuanced? And I'm not so much talking here about bottom-up versus top-down as the environment and the nature of the questions and the way in which we challenge scientists to come forward with problems and solutions. So I think one of the questions will be what kind of environment, what kind of questions are scientists kind of questions, not which questions, are scientists encouraged to explore? Because I think if we know one thing, it's that whatever the large-scale, massively innovative thing that is going on in 5 to 10 years' time, we probably don't know what that actually is right now. And we need the kind of people who can imagine what it is and are encouraged to think about it in a way that has genuine social and technological impact.
Okay, yeah, very quickly, Phil, and then quickly from Xavier. We've got 2 more topics I'd like to cover with the panel, but I want to make sure people have a chance to comment, ask questions.
Yeah, I just think it's a really, really critical point, because I think it demonstrates, it illustrates that right now, the way that we approach these problems is completely the wrong way around, right? I think our ability to, we live in such a complex world. There are so many factors that we have to take into consideration. It's interdisciplinary. In the kind of world that we're trying to deploy AI, there are all these regulations, there's access to high-performance compute, there are all these considerations that we need to give. And I think it's about creating a world where we're able to experiment, and we're able to experiment and fail. And I think for Europe culturally, that's quite a difficult thing to try and accept. But one where you can experiment, you rattle through as many options as possible, and you work out which one has the most solid kind of proposition to take forward. And I think that's something that is critically important, I think.
Okay, Xavier, very quick comment on the policy side.
Yes, there was a comment on long-term thinking, and I wanted to come back to that around the topic of skills, because this is also something that we're looking at EIT manufacturing in EIT Galaxy in general. But I think in Europe there is a lack of interest in STEM education that is quite strong, and if we want to bet on the future, we have also to bring back younger generation to those more scientific topics, so that we also have the right skilled people in the future when we need them. Betting on longer term, really also on the skills, and for the short and medium term, we need also to find and launch initiatives that are upskilling, reskilling people on those new technologies, because in manufacturing, if we change an operator by a machine, then the skills needed are completely different, and we need to reskill the whole workforce. So it's very important to support the advancement of technologies with the right speed of upskilling. So that would be my first comment. Second, very quick comment. I heard many interesting things about bottom-up approach and the importance of the RC and big challenges. And I think at some point in this technology development, we need to think also a bit more about what are the market opportunities. And what I'm seeing in my galaxy is that there's a very high number of projects that we're receiving that are thinking, okay, I'm going to develop that technology because it's so well. And they have very little knowledge or even interest of whether there's actually a need or an interest from the markets that for that kind of solution, or if there's not 100 other solutions that might do the work the same way or in a more efficient way. And yeah, we really need also to train or to educate our researchers in thinking at some point in the development of research, in thinking also on more challenge-based approach and market opportunities, because this is also very important.
Fantastic. Okay, thank you for all of that so far. Does anyone have a question, comment, input?
Thank you. Karim Hassan, working for the Catalonia here in Brussels. Thank you for a very interesting conversation. I just have, I don't know what it is exactly, but Yeah, it's sort of, there are many examples, but I know Barcelona supercomputing is, for example, one of the projects is helping to predict climate disasters or sort of thing, right? And then at the same time, there's the predictive, the image analysis to detect if there's cancer coming along. And then there's me, generating images on Bing, right? Is there a space for the community to come along and help the policymakers as well understand and differentiate? Because it doesn't seem like all applications of AI have the same value. And maybe the parts that speak, so the parts that we keep in mind about, deep seek, and we think of making new images, are not necessarily the ones that we want, sort of, to finance, right? So the US is focused on, I'm taking too long, but anyway, the question is, can you also help is there a space for a discussion, better understanding that, preventing health, et cetera, has a different weight than TikTok users being able to, use AI for other stuff, example. Thank you, sorry.
No, that's a great question. Ties in nicely with this question of prioritization and competitiveness. Any other questions or comments? Yes.
I'm Frank from the Amsterdam University of Applied Sciences, and I was wondering actually two things. One is, when you mentioned open source, that I'm a full supporter of that. I saw many of you not. But then when I take this back to the first panel downstairs about geopolitics, there's not that much, well, there's also a counterforce to that wants to close things up instead of opening them up. So how could we have strengthened our dialogue towards the politicians that they actually embrace open source instead of saying, hey, we should keep this to Europe and Europe only? And the second question is, we need, I think, technologists, so more technology and STEM education and things like that. But I think the impacts of AI on society are probably might be very big. So I think we also need investment in humanities, in social sciences, in design sciences, and everything else to be able, so not just focus on the technology, but open this up. So actually we have science to harness the full potential. We need more than technology.
Great. Okay, thank you, Frank. So we've got three very good questions here: the policy engagement space and potential prioritization around particular domains, the value of different applications of AI. We have open versus closed, how to make the case, and then we have the broadening of the scientific base, SSH, and not just the mathematicians, physicians, engineers, etc. So let's start with the policy engagement. Maybe I'm going to invite Phil to go first on this, because as a partnership supported by the Commission, you kind of function as a platform to get stakeholders' voices into the discussion. But do you have the same discussions around differentiated value, different areas of AI development and application? How would you respond to the first question?
So I think there are two parts to the answer, because I think as ADRA, what we look at is a kind of technology application sector agnostic approach to developing the technology, right? So it's literally about developing the basis for those technologies that could have any number of different kind of applications. But I think the question that was made around the kind of use cases is that, you're looking, so in the US, the market's basically B2C, right? So it's about a B2C company providing a very limited number of use cases, well, for the limited number of use cases to the consumer. So that's their kind of frame for how they work with consumers. And I'm sure they're working on other use case applications. But I think in Europe, the environment is slightly different. So the AI that we should be looking to identify is AI that works more in the presence of B2B. So what will make our business environment work slightly more efficiently? And I think there was a comment that was made previously about our pre-existing manufacturing industries and everything else. I think that's where we should be pouring our support. We should be looking to help them support. We should be looking to support our kind of legacy industries, whether it's about them being more competitive now or developing new business lines. But I think that should be our focus more broadly. So I think it's a bit They're two separate things. And then I think in terms of kind of key messages to policymakers, I mean, I was trying to kind of outlined the point earlier, but we have to take bets. As spray and pray doesn't work. You have to take bets. And that's, so far, I think what some policymakers have struggled with doing. And that's where I would like to see a bit more, of a kind of coherent articulation of what we want as Europe and how we want to invest.
Okay. Xavier, do you want to add anything on that? I'm going to ask about the open and close to our academic friends here, and then Fab, I'm going to ask you about how many of those 150 postdocs are from social sciences and humanities. But a chance for a comment from you, Xavier.
I don't think I have much to add, but I think, consultations should also take into account all the actors from the society. So we are talking a lot with industry research centers and trying to understand also what are the challenges in manufacturing and who should we listen to when we are trying to push some ideas of policies. But of course, we should go broader, and I think the civil society needs to be listened to as well.
But I guess the related question, if you think about it in the context of EIT manufacturing, and what you mentioned earlier about the next generation, the next wave, are people just looking for what they're comfortable with and say we should focus activities, EIT manufacturing should focus on the development of things that we could use today? Or are they thinking longer term to say, in 5 or 10 years, this could be transformative, we should focus our efforts there as well? Is there a hierarchy of needs and interest?
Well, being situated where we are in the Horizon Europe galaxy, of course, a lot of what we're funding needs to have applications in 1 to 2 years. So there is short term, but what we're looking at is, okay, what are we going to fund in the next 5 years? And what is coming from research, what is coming from other pillars, and trying also to think strategically on how to structure ourselves and how to give hints of where we want to go, of course, and this is also supported by European policy, and so we're trying to juggle, but yeah, I mean, it's a bit more shorter term what we're doing.
Okay, great. So, second question, maybe Andrew first, Fatma second. Open versus closed. How do you make the case for open source?
I mean, I think that the base case for open source is exactly as it's been presented. I mean, its successes speak to the fact that perhaps against anyone's predictions, it achieved extraordinary breakthroughs in software, right? I think the question is whether, is there a nice clear-cut answer to how far we're going to push it open source and how far security considerations are going to have to rein that back? But that has always been a question. I mean, I think, it's inflected and presented in particular ways at a given moment or given time, but that was always there. As always was the interplay between proprietary and restricted and open source in many environments, including in cell phones. So that, I mean, it's a bit of a non-answer, but I think that the non-answer is this will play out in terms of the interplay of legislation and the creativity of open source and the two, and also commercial proprietary, and they are likely to play off each other, and we are unlikely to be able to predict how that is actually going to turn out over a period of time. And I might come back at some point to the technology and humanities question as a humanities person, but we'll stick.
Okay, we only have 2 or 3 minutes left, but that's okay. We'll give you a final word. Okay, Fatma.
So yeah, I think when I mentioned open science, I was putting open data and open source into the same context. So in that sense, I think I tried to mention it, but I totally think open source is the way to go. And academically, but also in the industries. And I think now with the DeepSeek, we are already seeing how this whole area is democratized again. It was already, because all the models that are created are because of the development of the open source. Like, models are put openly. We don't, like in computer science, we don't anymore have even peer review. It's all archive, and and the development is extremely fast. So I think we have to mention this to the policymakers, to the here in the European base as well, where we have to just raise the voice and make this claim very, very openly towards open source as well. So in that sense, I agree.
Okay, so final comment, Fabrizio.
Well, I think you were going to ask me how many of those 150 postdocs went to Versailles. Well, actually quite a bit.
No, I deliberately asked because of the breadth of the activities that you have, the different domains and the
So
very interdisciplinary nature of what you're doing at BSc.
Yeah, basically the additional resources that came for AI to BSc has been one of the major enabler of having a computational group in a social science society. So definitely that is an important asset. Again, Europe is probably more sensitive to this kind of issue than a more industrial kind of oriented society like the United States or even China. So that I think is to be kept in mind and is very important. Now, on the open source of the code, but also open source of the data, that is very, very important. DeepSeek also, thanks to that, has been so quickly developed, so successfully. But in case of AI, where the understanding the reasoning within AI is one of the big issues. It has to do also with the regulatory thing. How can you trust the result coming from there? Again, open source can help a lot, because if it's a completely black box offered by a company, how much you can trust the solution or the advice given by that. And especially now that we have seen, experimentally in many fields. I mean, if we speak with the ECMWF, they tell you that already today there are new AI-based prediction models. They beat the conventional physical-based model 95% of the times. So, but that is, again, is relatively short, medium. So if you really want to move to climate and make very, very long prediction, 200 years from now, you need to understand the way in which the model come up with the thing. And again, if it's completely closed, if it's not open source, it's going to be much harder. So another big plea for open source forever.
Okay, open source forever. Very positive note to end on. I think we will end there because we're between everybody and lunch. And thanks to the eloquence and the brilliance of the panel, there were a couple of topics that we didn't actually get to cover. One was the investment one, the capital question, although that was partly covered earlier, and also the questions about sustainability, right? So for the massive amplification of AI activities, infrastructures, data systems, etc. in Europe, how to manage that in a more sustainable way. I think we'll come back to that. Right? We have a roundtable in late March on AI factories, and I think the sustainability and energy components of this new promotion to build up Europe's AI capacity is a huge aspect of that. So it's time for lunch. Thank you very much for joining us, and also to those online. But please, before you go downstairs for your break, join me in thanking Philip, Fabrizio, Fatma, Andrew, and Xavier for all of their contributions.